Welcome to Curious Crossroads. Today we're joined by Thomas L. Pelissero, author of Bring One Home, a memoir of boyhood, basketball, and hometown spirit. His book takes us to Michigan's Upper Peninsula in the late 60s, a place where a small-town basketball team, struggling through a long losing streak, became a symbol of grit, loyalty, and community pride. Tom, welcome to the show.
Well, Doug, it's great to be here. Really appreciate that you would take time to not only read my book, but allow me on your podcast. So thank you.
Before we dig in, and I kind of see the stuff behind you there, let's go back to when we first met. I believe it was in the early 80s. You were a highly successful program director at a radio station, Pop Jazz, called K-Twin FM 108. And I had some great times. I know you did too.
Yeah, I got into broadcasting in 1974, and somehow it took me to the Twin Cities. And I worked for a really good guy, Jack Moore, and he was always creative, pushing the envelope. And more important, he bet on a 22-year-old kid to run his station. And I think he was happy. And we created that format called Pop Jazz. It eventually became Smooth Jazz. And a few years later, we took it national, and it was called the Breeze Network. So mixture of popular music, but mostly contemporary jazz, and just was a lot of fun. There was nothing we couldn't do. And we even did a little television, if you remember, Doug.
Yep, I was on that television.
You sure were. I think that's when you met your wife, too, right around that time period.
Yeah, you got a good memory.
I do. But we put stereo television on the air in the Twin Cities as well. We were always first doing something, creating something new, and then we'd move on to the next thing. But yeah, you were my great friends and great announcers, and I always could count on you. So great to be back with you here talking about these things.
Yes, it is.
For our audience now, why don't you give them a little synopsis of what your book is all about?
Sure. I grew up in Bessemer, Michigan, born and raised there. And I followed our basketball team, which was the Bessemer Speedboys, which was our high school basketball team, always wanting to be a speed boy. So when you're 7, 8, 9 years old, you're watching these big kids play. And of course, they're 16, 17 years old. But they seem like big kids. And you said, someday I'll be out there too. Well, when I'm 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, our team can't win a game. And we go on a 42-game losing streak during that time period. But there was never a point in which I thought, gee, I don't want to be a speed boy. I still wanted to be out there playing because it just seemed so exciting. But what it mirrored was we were an iron ore mining community. And the hematite was discovered in Bessemer in 1884, 1883, right around there. And when the railroad came in, then they were able to bring it, all across the United States. But by 1966, it actually ended. So it's only about an 80-year industry. So what happened, and that's part of the thought behind the book, is what was the core reason for the losing streak? Well, one of the key reasons is some of our best future players were moving out of the community because their dads lost their jobs in the mines. And so they went to other communities in the Upper Peninsula, or they went to Minnesota, Mesabi, up in that area. And to tighten things down within the school system because there's less revenue per student, the school board decided to lock down all the buildings, including the gymnasiums. So if there was a youth program, it was eliminated. So if you're 7, 9, 10 years old, you have to play outside on the snow-covered driveway, which was okay. We did it all the time. But it's a little different when the surrounding communities have grade school basketball programs. They're playing in gymnasiums. They're playing in a league. And then someday when you get to high school, you're playing against these kids that have been playing indoors their entire life, and you get clobbered. And that's what I discovered with my research into the book. that we were losing jobs in the mining industry. Families were moving away. We had no basketball program for the youth. And we were about to go, we didn't know it. We were about to go on a 42 game losing streak, which, by the way, was the longest streak ever in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan up until 1966. I didn't research it after that, but it's quite a story. Quite a story.
And this has evolved over 10 years. Is that right? You started putting it together about 10 years ago, or?
Yeah, you know me, Doug, well enough that I'm always thinking, I can't, I think I can do that too, right? As a kid, rather than being an adult for about 60 years, I thought about writing a book. I never thought it would be this book, but I always thought about writing a book. So for 8 years, I worked on writing the book in retirement, and COVID gave me a lot of time to write because there wasn't much else to do. But so I always say it took me 8 years to write it, but I've been dreaming about it for 60 years.
And how many people did you interview for the book?
I interviewed over 50 people. Sometimes it was a sit down recorded interview, planned, lots of questions. Other times I just bump into someone in a restaurant and we get talking about things. And I'd say, hey, can you clarify one thing? So they became another source for me. But when you talk to 50 people, it's all age ranges, right? So I found the two coaches that were involved in this 42 game losing streak. One was 78 years old and the other was 80 years old. But their memories were good. And they tried to explain to me what they were given. These were my players, great athletes, but they had no finesse for playing basketball. They were football players.
I was going to ask, did you get any pushback from the coaches or anybody else that you interviewed who didn't quite grasp what you were doing and thought, geez, why is this guy writing about our losing streak?
Well, it's kind of funny. John Bonk, who was the coach, who went 0-33, he, at the first meeting, I said, well, I'd like to record this so I get all the information. And he put his hand over the recorder right away. He says, why are you doing this? Because, I didn't win a game, but he said it in a way like so curious. And we really have had a good relationship over the past 8 years that I've been talking to him. But to be honest, no. I had a few people who didn't want to talk about it because they didn't remember much or they had moved on. But most people really wanted to talk about it. But I had to research in the newspapers what they were telling me to be sure it was correct. And all the newspapers are online. So you can look up the game stories. And boy, did they write. They wrote everything about every game, every grade school, everything in the paper. So I was able to go back and verify things. But I interviewed the players, the coaches, the cheerleaders. I interviewed people who were in town that either were adults, parents, or were kids like me, right? My buddies. And I had 4 or 5 buddies. We'd go back and forth, exchanging stories. And then I'd always have to go and, again, source the information to make sure it was correct. And in most cases, it was. If I asked somebody something specific about the basketball program, they go, I don't remember that. I don't remember that. And I'd say, well, you scored 21 points against Hurley. And he go, you know why I remember that? And then, they would explain it, but you had to finally, keep probing. And as you know, Doug, as a reporter, as soon as someone says, do you really want to know? You go, yes, I do. If you let them talk. So,
what was the process as far as, was there like an outline that you had, or would you just grab a little bit here and talk to this person there and just be collecting it in a notebook?
I started with some index cards and then I would put them in piles as to, this was about basketball, this was about the downtown, this was about mining, and try to make sure that I had those questions right. And then I had my list of people I wanted to interview, and I knew most of them. Bessemer's a pretty small town, so the families all know each other. So I had pretty good access, but I would say, basketball, the coaches' names would go here, the players. And then the businesses, I wanted to either talk to the business owner or talk to the children of the business owner. And because a lot of times the parents had already passed away. And the iron ore mining was the hardest because the mines have been closed since 1966. So you really don't have a number of people that can explain what happened. So I relied heavily on the newspapers there. And then a couple of uncles that worked, long ago in the mines would tell me a story or two. But we had a lot of discussion around the like Thanksgiving table, and which was always initiated by the grown-ups in there, and the kids couldn't say a thing unless they were called upon. But I would hear them saying, well, I hear the Peterson mine's closing on such and such a date, and somebody would clarify whether that was happening. So I remember those stories because my grandfather was a judge in town, and one of the big cigars in the Democratic Party, and his brothers were the miners. So my grandfather was friends with the supervisors of the mines, and my other uncle, his brother, was friends with the miners themselves, and they have a completely different idea about what you should think of the mines and what they did for our community.
So good and bad, you're saying, as far as one thought it was a good thing?
So if somebody died in the mine, my grandfather would say, well, that was investigated and, they were cleared. While someone else said, yeah, well, if they hadn't told them to go in there too soon, and you'd hear those stories back and forth. But my grandfather, who I never knew, worked in the mine, which I write about in there, Peter Pelissero, Pietro. He died when my dad was 17, but he had been in the hospital since my dad was 12. So my dad did not have a good opinion of the mines, because when my grandfather died, and he's, junior, senior in high school, the mines didn't leave anything for his mother. So he had to work. His brother had to work. Another brother who had left home had to come home and then support the family. And again, that was the iron ore mining industry. They just, people died. And as my father told me many times, they said his dad had tuberculosis. So they put him in the Grandview Hospital, which had a tuberculosis ward. And they did that to a number of miners. Well, they didn't have TB. Unlikely. They were just breathing the silicate every day and couldn't breathe. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And again, so
I covered that.
You said all the research for this started in 2020, or did it start before?
It started well before that, but the newspapers weren't really online to the extent I needed till about 2010. And I was always reading stories to clarify stories I heard from my friends. Remember when I hit that home run, it was against so-and-so, and then I'd look it up. I go, you never hit a home run. I looked at game and said, well, I thought it was an inside the park one. So I got used to, taking some of the hero worship out of the stories, by researching things. But I was really heavy into research starting in 2017. Yeah.
I got to ask you too, before I forget, there's so many stories in the book. I kind of put down an earmark on each page that I thought was interesting or fun or witty. And I got to tell you, Tom, almost every single page has a corner that's turned down. It was so good. I got to ask, I'm not going to give it away, but was the boot story a real story?
Oh, absolutely. It's real. And it's one that people in Bessemer, they go, hey, you got your kick boots on today?
Right.
And yeah, that's an honest to goodness story. And it happened exactly that way. And when I used to read stories to my children at night, as you probably did with Doug Jr., there's a point at which you've read all the books and you do it a second time and a third time. And my kids just said, Dad, don't you have any other stories? And I said, well, I got a lot of Bessemer stories. And then I'd tell them the Kick-a-Boot story. I'd tell them about the Christmas tree on top of the bluff in town. I'd tell about going hunting in the woods and just us kids, building tree houses. They wanted to hear that. and they'd
Right.
correct me if I left any information out, if I told it to them, many times. So,
Neat.
but sledding, I don't know what it was like for you growing up. You grew up in Coon Rapids,
We
Doug,
did.
or
They never
yeah,
closed down a whole street so that we could go
yeah,
tobogganing, but we had our hills
yeah.
around
And
here.
now you guys had 30,000 people, and we had 1,500 people. But yeah, they just put up an orange sawhorse, large one, and that was just telling the drivers, "Hey, remember, there's kids sledding here." And that's what we did all day long. And they never sanded or salted that street; they just plowed it. And there'd be 150 kids that lived on our streets. So we probably have 50, 60 kids sledding at a time on these streets. And yeah, we would stretch it. We would go beyond where the sawhorses were because, that was open area. We just had to watch for cars. So it was the same thing playing basketball. Some of the courts ran out into the street, because it was a flat surface. And if you were taking the ball out, somebody would yell car, and you'd back up, they'd go by, and then the game would continue. Um, we were not allowed to really be in the house during the day. If we weren't in school, we had to be outside playing, doing something, sledding, building snow forts, playing basketball, shooting a BB gun at birds or whatever. We were always outside doing something.
No social media.
Yeah. Well, and I think we're starting to see the swing back, right? That
Right.
people don't want to use social media anymore. But
Yep.
I'll tell you, it was really helpful to me to have Facebook to be able to connect with people. It was really helpful for me to have a computer in my pocket to be able to look something up while I was meeting with someone. They say, "When did you say that happened?" I could look up the newspaper and say, "Okay, there it is." So all that technology was really helpful in creating this book. And I know I could not have written Bring One Home um, uh, 20 years ago. There just would not have been enough information for me to get
Right.
and to be able to connect with people. Early on in the process, I would write 3-4 sentences of Bring One Home, and I go back and edit it. And, I think there's a period here and comma there. And then I read Stephen King's book about writing, and he said, if you're going to write a book, you just write, write, and then you take it and you put it in the drawer for 6 months, and then you come back to it. He says, don't edit it, don't do that. And so even John Steinbeck, he wrote Grapes of Wrath. He said the same thing. He said, first of all, you're going to have 400 blank pages, which I suppose in those days he did. He wrote it or typed it. He says, you're never going to finish. This is Steinbeck. You're never going to finish. So you have to focus on one page a day. That's all you need to do, and don't edit it. And then set it aside and come back and do the same thing. And, which was really helpful, focus on one person. So I thought about Coach Bonk, and then I wrote, or Coach Gregus, and then I wrote a certain player, and then
Right.
I wrote, or the kickaboots, me and my brother, remembering the looks on our faces and so on.
Right.
And that was really helpful, because if you say this whole 350 people in front of you, you can't do it. It just doesn't work. So
What was your favorite part of the book then? Did you have a favorite part or a section that you enjoyed writing the most?
the prologue, where I got to talk about my dad, was my favorite part, because I knew all these guys and they were great athletes, and they just so wanted to help each other out, whether they're playing ball or working. I really enjoyed writing the prologue, because that was the first UP championship in Bessemer's history in basketball. And my dad had to borrow $12 from his brothers so he could get a hotel room or pay for his portion of the hotel room in Marquette. Just little things like that. And so I think for me, the prologue was my favorite writing, but my most exciting part is when they finally break the streak.
Right.
Because so much happened that night, and I don't want to give any of that away, but nobody would have believed that all those things could have happened in one game. And especially when you've been reading and something always happened to this team and they couldn't win a game.
I like in your author's note, if those people that want to still aren't quite sure everything that the book is about, you said, at its core, this book is about life in small town America in the 1960s. There was fun and laughter. There was sadness and tension. There was good old-fashioned competition between neighboring towns. There were wonderful characters, and at times there was deep disappointment. But more than anything else, there was a hometown spirit that rang so loud I can still hear it. I mean, that's just kind of sums it up so nicely.
Yeah, well, I should have started with that. It's how I feel. I have a deep connection with Bessemer. In the back of the book, you'll see words that I wrote 50 years ago for the song My Bessemer. So in 1978, I put out a 45 record that really did well in the community because it sang the praises of Bessemer. And that in the name of the book is Bring One Home, a memoir of boyhood basketball and hometown spirit. Well, that hometown spirit came from that line in the song that I wrote about Bessemer. So
wow, I'd like to get a copy of that, or if you can,
you can download
email
it.
us.
Yeah,
It's downloadable.
you can. Yeah, it's on Spotify and Apple and everywhere. Michael Monroe, who is a really well-known artist in the Twin Cities.
Yeah.
Michael just re-recorded it for me after 50 years.
Really?
He did a beautiful job. Yeah. He did
that'll be great to listen to.
I'm going to tell you a story of love and glory. Gather round for tales of this town. We're going to bring one home again to hear memories of Bessemer.
Yeah,
we used to always play Michael Monroe.
Yes.
Back in the day.
Summer Rain. Love that song.
Yep.
So.
I've seen him up in Duluth perform a few times too.
He's so good.
Yeah. I think he's got a thing where he has a pretty nice home and he invites people to come in and actually hear a concert in his home.
I don't know if they're still up there or not, but yeah.
You know, another good part of the book, and this was the opening that kind of grabbed me. Your dad had actually won the championship. And you mentioned in there, everybody's just higher than a kite, happier than can be. And this kind of grabbed me for the rest of the read. It says, they had scaled the tallest mountain and were the envy of Michigan's Upper Peninsula for the very first time, and they savored the feeling. But with their heads so high above the clouds, they could not foresee the storm brewing below. And I just think that kind of summed up the whole layout for the rest of the book.
Here I'm going to write 64 chapters about a basketball team that can't win a game, and I open it with the championship, right? Yep. So I had to set things up, and that line really worked well,
right?
Because from that point on, I'm taking you into the 1960s, and I will go back and forth. I will bring you to the 50s and talk about how we won championships and so on. But there was this long dry spell. It was 1,051 days between wins. That's 4 parts of 4 seasons, 4 graduating classes. I'm age 6 to 10.
Right.
So it's a long time to be watching it, but I never wavered from the fact that I wanted to play this game, and got the opportunity to do it in grade school and in high school. But without that program that was instituted in 1964, which allowed us young people to start playing basketball again, we would not have had the championships that we did have in the 1970s. And no one really understood that. But you asked earlier, how did people feel about it? At my book signing in Bessemer, I thought, well, maybe we'll have 50 people, the family and everything. We had over 150 people come, standing room only. They wanted to hear this story. And what they took away is we were no longer the team that lost, those losers. We actually something good came out of all those years. And even though I kind of thought that might happen, I actually saw it. And I have letters from players that said, you brought us out of the darkness. You finally showed what we were trying to do all along. And I went, wow, for a small town, and this was their high school team. He says, we've never been able to shake that we lost all those games in a row. And yet, as a kid, I still wanted to play. I wanted to be a speedboy. I wanted to be just like them.
Right. Yeah, you were so respectful to everything, Now, at the at the end of the book, when they're going to end the losing streak, I'm not going to give anything away, but did those things actually happen that you talk about as far as the player and that sort of stuff?
Yes. As I said, what's this dark cloud that is, floating over the top of this team? Because just when you think they're going to win, something bad happens. That all happened.
Right.
All of that.
Wow, that had to just be devastating.
And I want people to read it. But you're saying, oh God, they're not going to win again.
Yep. Yep.
But the story's all true. And I'll tell you offline the story of the player that was injured and so on.
Okay.
But I think people need to read this book. I think anyone who grew up in a small town, anyone that grew up during the iron ore mining industry, really any mining, which is there's shutdowns, there's furloughs, there's strikes and so on. To anyone who grew up wanting to play for their high school team, regardless of sport, I think they'll identify with this. The small restaurant you went to, where you hung out, all those things.
Right. I think for people, even the younger kids today should read a book like this, because it's so refreshing to go back and see what life used to be like.
Yeah, it's history, Doug. They are teaching my book in the high school now. The social studies and the English for how to write a narrative, and social studies for the history and what life was like back in the 60s. And they asked me to come in and get it started by presenting. And, I'm talking about Buddy Holly and the Beatles and other things that I have in the book. And they're looking at me like, and they would be, and then they came up to me afterwards and said, how do you know my grandparents? And I went, I know your grandparents. Who are they? And then they would tell me my classmates. And I go, well, that's right. They would be your grandparents, So
right.
Somehow you go from being a 10-year-old kid to a 70-year-old man, and you don't even connect it. You still think you're that 10-year-old kid, So.
And then as far as reception goes too, did I see something where you were at the Capitol or you were being honored for your book?
Yeah, on the U.S. House of Representatives, they did what they call a congressional record, and they read it on the House, which I was really honored because they only get 2 minutes a week to speak, and he used his 2 minutes. This was Representative Jack Bergman from Michigan, to honor not only the book but the town of Bessemer.
Wow.
And that meant a lot to me. It meant a lot to the community. And for everybody in town, hey, we're putting Bessemer back on the map. And that was, really fun. So, yeah, it was a great honor. You never know where it's going to go.
I saw that clip, and that's pretty moving. That's pretty neat to have something like that happen.
Yeah, I mean, they could have talked about anything, right? They could have talked about Iran, or they decided to talk about bringing one home. And someone told me the other day, he says it's the, feel-good memoir of the year, because it is a good book. It is a fun read. It probably doesn't match the great writers who they have a memoir about being in Gaza or in Iran or, wherever. I decided to write a book about a small town and what it was like to just be a kid on your own. Yeah. And your parents said, get out there and figure out the day.
I got to think that your wife, Joy, has been a big part of everything that you do and your success. Oh, yeah. Was she helping to keep you organized and that sort of thing with the book too?
Well, one thing she gave me was time. So from December to March every year, in the morning. I'd turn on the heat in the basement, and I would go down there, and sometimes I worked for an hour, and sometimes I worked for 8 hours. And she gave me that time to write. She was from the neighboring town, Ironwood, so she was real helpful. Before we met, she spent 50 years of her life here, not only growing up, but staying here and teaching. She even bought me a desk so that I could write, and just very supportive.
The other thing too that I applaud you for is you've been doing a lot of donations at your book signings. The people that are purchasing books, a lot of those profits have been going back to libraries and schools and that sort of thing.
Well, I put an emphasis on literacy. And so when I did my book signing, I said that I'll give the entire $20 from the book sale to the library. I didn't realize we would raise $5,000. But I was proud of that. And that just said, you got to do more of it. So on March 4th, I'm going to nearby Hurley, and I'm doing the same thing there. It won't be as many people because it's Hurley, not Bessemer. But if we can get $200 or $2,000 to get kids to read real books again, just like we did, get a library card, that's what I want to do. But I also had the opportunity to pay for meals for seniors. And so a couple of weeks ago, I bought 120 meals for the seniors that dine in. I keep thinking they're these older people, but they're me. They're
I feel the same way.
My friends are saying, "Hey, thanks for the meal." I went, "What were you doing there?" Well, I'm 72 years old. This is what I do. I don't cook for myself, but it's all from the profits of Bring One Home, and just makes me feel good. My mom would always say, "Well, you're not going to keep that money, are you? So and so gave me $5. Or, you're not going to keep that money, are you?"
Right.
Well, no. And now I feel like I make money, and I go, I got to give it back. But it feels real good. I put a whole scrapbook together, letters I'm getting from people and pictures of the different events.
Very cool.
Emails and,
And you got it in an old-fashioned scrapbook. That's nice to see. Haven't seen one of those in a while.
This town, I don't want to say this town is better for it, but this town is happier for the book.
Right.
And
they've made you better for it.
I think so.
Anything we're missing, Tom, that you wanted to add, or?
No, other than where you can buy it.
Right. Yes, exactly.
It's on Amazon. It's on Amazon. You can also buy it through Walmart.com. You could buy it through BarnesandNoble.com, only online. And then locally, of course, we have all kinds of bookstores.
Yeah. Would you ever do like an audio book or Audible for it?
Well, I've been asked to do that, and I would have to listen to the voices, to make sure it matches.
Yeah, let me know if you need a voice.
Yeah. Say I was right on top of it. How about if I buy the phone number 777-7777?
You've got a good memory.
And then Doug, I learned so much from you, and I would tell stories about you, about this friend. I go, you know what he did? He got, this 800 number, or he got this or that, and then he resold it to somebody. You were Doug Jr., your dad. If he needed to come up with $500, he came up with the next great idea, and he figured it out. And then he would run with it and turn it into $5,000.
You are too kind. Very kind.
Yeah. But no, whenever I needed a friend or needed help on something, you were there, Doug. I really appreciate
that.
So,
Tom, it's been a pleasure having you on our show today. We wish you continued success with your book. And of course, I would look forward to buying you lunch if you ever are in Minnesota again. I know you come back on occasion.
Yeah.
Well, good. That'll do it for another episode of Curious Crossroads. I'm Doug. This is my son, Doug. Until next time, have a good day. Have a good life.